Our first speaker is Doug Kluck, the Regional Climate Service Director for the North Central United States, which includes Kansas. He's worked for NOAA for 29 years since 1992, first with the National Weather Service and then with the National Centers for Environmental Information. So I will turn it over to Doug, and afterwards, if we have time, there will be a brief question and answer session. Again, if you'd like to submit questions, please use the chat feature. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see something like a presentation on one of your screens. I haven't blown it up yet. Let me see if it works. Is that the full view or the half view, if you will? Do you see the full slide?
It looks great.
Is that a thumbs up? I can't see anybody.
Yes, we're seeing the full slide, Doug.
All right. Hey, thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you all. I've been to your conference a few different times over the years. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. And hopefully, I'm going to tell you something you don't know already, but I think a lot of it is, I'll just say common sense in the fact that we've experienced some of these issues I'm going to be talking about. One of the things that I was asked to talk about was trends in the state of Kansas when it comes to temperature and precipitation for the most part, and maybe a little bit more about on the precipitation side than the temperature one. I'm getting us ready for what I guess hopefully to some of us is coming in terms of snow and maybe not the ice part in the trees and such, but just trying to get us sort of assimilated to what we may expect in the next few months. Here are the things I'm going to be talking about. If I have time, and please, if I'm going too long, just interrupt me and say, Doug, you've bored us enough. Let's move on. But I'm going to try to get all the way and mention the winter outlook and a little bit about La Nina and stuff, but it's a very short presentation at that. So I'm also going to warn you that I'm going to be showing a number of different graphics and graphs, and I don't mean to bore you with those, and I probably won't go into great detail on what they say, or I won't go into great detail about what the graphs are in and of themselves, but I'll give you the overview of what they really mean. So here's some takeaways that from the whole presentation. You can probably just look at this one slide and say, okay, thanks, we're done. But one thing I'm going to show is that precipitation trends generally show increases across the state. Again, it kind of depends on the time frame you're looking at, but we'll get into that a little bit. Temperature trends are also increasing. Minimum temperatures are increasing more rapidly. In other words, low temperatures of the day are increasing, or are not as cold as they used to be, is probably the better way to say that. High temperatures, maximum temperatures of the day aren't increasing as aren't going up as rapidly as the minimums are. I'm going to show you a little bit about the 30-year normals and tell you why we do that a little bit, because it really depends on the industry that you're in or what you care about, whether a 30-year normal or a 150-year normal is something you really want to use for your decision making. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about billion-dollar disasters and trends with those as well, all sort of focused on Kansas. But I'm going to start probably at the world view a little bit more and talk about global temperature trends with one slide and only one slide. First of all, that big map up there with all the red and pink on it is something we manufacture every month. We update it, but that's supposed to be showing you how temperatures around the world are materializing, I guess is the best way to say that, on a monthly basis. In this case, it's January through October of this year. It's the whole year so far in terms of temperatures. And wherever you see anything other than blue or white, temperatures are above normal, basically. That's what this means. So this is one of the reasons I'm showing you this is because this is a very typical map. It's very, very seldom. In fact, it hasn't been for a number of years that we have seen below normal temperatures be the majority of the region, majority of the globe. And if you look there at that table, I'm showing you, and I've circled them, the years, the warmest years on record in the last since 1880, around the world, the warmest years on record. So we do think 2021 is going to come in around 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that, depending upon the rest of the year, how it all falls out. But you can see a lot of the records are recent years in terms of warmth around the world. Something a little closer to home. So obviously some pictures, those are actually Missouri Basin flooding pictures. So far eastern Kansas and some dry creeks and hail damage, something pretty common out there too. So let me start with Kansas temperature trends just for the whole state. And this is the average temperature. This is not looking at minimums or maximums or anything else. This is just the average when you compute it all, what it looks like from 1895 to today. There is a general increase. It's I would say a relatively slow increase of, in this case, 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. So the graph is one thing. You can look at that and look at all the years. You can look at the 30s and how warm it was there. And then you can kind of look at more recent period and how warm it's been in the last, 20, 30 years. There's a general upward trend. The largest seasonal trend is in the winter time. In other words, we're seeing the most warming in the winter rather than the summer, which is interesting in and of itself. And as I mentioned earlier, minimum temperatures or low temperatures of the day are rising faster than the maximums. I also want to say right now that I'm using this tool that anybody and everybody can access. It's called Climate at a Glance. And if you type Climate at a Glance in your Google search, you'll find this NOAA web page. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm just going to tell you everything I have, pretty much everything I have on here, anybody can access. Now, I've done it on a couple different scales. So I've got the whole state of Kansas. You can go down to a what we call a climate division, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You can go down to a county. If you want to look at your the way temperatures or precipitation are behaving, you can do it at a county level. You can even look at certain cities, a lot of cities actually, across Kansas, if you're interested in that. So this tool allows you to look that if you will, that far down on scale. Here's the maximum temperature trend. So these are high temperatures of the day, and this is the trend that we've seen. Again, just a small increase, a 0.1 degree Fahrenheit increase in terms of maximum temperature per decade increase. Now, over time, that all adds up. So maybe at the beginning of the end of the last, 2 centuries ago, 1895 or so, maybe we're a little cooler. We've all warmed up a degree or two since then in terms of Fahrenheit degrees. And it doesn't tell the whole story because look, we're looking at the whole annual maximum temperature. So maybe we should break that down, and we'll do that a little bit later. Here's the minimum. Now we're looking at low temperatures. What is happening to low temperatures across Kansas for that matter? They're actually increasing a little bit faster, 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. So the warm temperature, believe it or not, it's getting warmer at night than during the day, or it's going faster in terms of increases. And believe me, it's true almost everywhere in the Midwest and across the U.S. as far as that's concerned, in terms of minimum temperatures increasing faster than the maximums. All right, now I said I wanted to break it down a little bit. We're still dealing with temperatures here. I just want to show you what it looks like in terms of winter, summer, fall, spring. And again, we're back to averages. We're not talking about minimums or maximums. We're just talking about the average of the day. And you notice that winter has the fastest increase in temperature compared to the other seasons. per decade in degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, fall has shown such a minor increase that it's sort of negligible on the trend there. Probably something you're a little more interested in talking about or hearing about today, maybe talking about, is precipitation trend. In this, we've seen a pretty, I think it's a pretty substantial increase in terms of precipitation increase across the state. Again, this is all of Kansas put together in one big lump, if you will. And the increase is about 1/4 of an inch per decade, which over from 1895 to today is a lot, if you think about that a little bit. So the increase is has been quite a bit over time. The upwards trend, like I said, is actually 26 hundredths of an inch per decade. I forgot to put the inch signal in there. The largest increase, as we'll see in a minute, is in the spring, and fall and winter happens to be a slower increase, and we can talk about that a little bit. So here again is the entire state of Kansas, the trend by season for every season. And spring, you can look, if you look really closely there, you can see how I've defined spring: March, April, and May, as opposed to winter being December, January, February, summer, June through August, and fall, September through November. General guidelines there for seasons. So I guess the word here is, or the key message here is, increases all year round, biggest increases in the spring, a little bit bigger in the summertime in terms of precipitation. But I guess the question then is, well, is that true across or is that true in eastern Kansas the same as it is in western Kansas? And absolutely the answer is no. All right, so bear with me a little bit. This graphic this page takes a little bit of explanation. So where you see the map of Kansas, you've got 9 different what we call climate divisions, and you can see your counties in there and all that. What this is detailing is an annual, again, we're talking annual now, not seasonal for the moment, January through December, of a precipitation trend by climate division. So the Northwest is number 1 in terms of the way the climate divisions are ranked or put on the state. So Division 1 is Northwest Kansas. Division 9 is Southeast Kansas, and you can see quite a bit of difference. And I'll just give you a second to take a look at that in terms of increase in precipitation from 1895 to 2021 in terms of trend. And that's looking over the entire period here of that's over 100 years, 120, almost 130 years of record. And just simply plotting a line and looking at averages and all that stuff. So also note that Northwest and Western Kansas, for the most part, are quite a bit drier than Eastern Kansas. So you would expect, if you did see increases in precipitation, you'd sort of expect to see a little bit less in the West and a little bit more in the East, generally speaking, just to keep things consistent. There's no way that Western Kansas is ever going to reach the same level as Eastern Kansas in terms of precipitation. That's just, on an odd year, sure, but not in a trend like this. So I think it's pretty telling when you look at Southeast Kansas and see almost a half an inch every decade increase in terms of precipitation, and sort of understanding what you're sort of, if you will, what you're up against in terms of making decisions based upon precipitation anyway, if you want to make those. Now, let's see. Oh, I better put these both up here. There we go. Sorry about that. So if we break this down a little bit more, and this is going to lead into the next part of my discussion, is that if we look over the last 30 years or so in terms of precipitation and that trend in precipitation, again, I'm only comparing Northwest and Southeast. Believe me, all the other climate divisions are there, and I probably should have listed them, but I sort of thought of this later when I was putting this presentation together, and I thought, I probably ought to look at more recent trends as opposed to the whole 1895 to now trend. And so when you do that, it's quite interesting. Over the last 30 years, if you look at Northwest Kansas, there's been an actual decline. Now, this is 30 years. Now, it doesn't mean it's a decline from the last 120 years. There's still, if you look over the last 120 years, there's still an increase. It's a slight one, but there's an increase in Northwest Kansas. But over the last 30 years, there's been a decline of 0.62 of an inch per year. So that's really, you can look at some of those years in there where you can remember 2012, for example. I think that shows up really well there. And I think it's 2002 or 2003, I don't remember which. Very severe droughts in that neck of the woods. And if you look down below Southeast Kansas, it's almost the opposite in terms of trend over the last 30 years from 1990 to 2020. Wow, 1.08 inches per decade. That's almost 3 inches increase in trend, or over 3 inches in trend over that period of time over the last 30 years. So that's something to consider, I suppose, over depending upon what kind of decisions you're making with water in Kansas. Again, all the other, these are based on climate divisions, so it's a lump of several counties together. One can look at individual counties, like I said earlier, one can look at individual cities in the same way I'm looking at these divisions. All right? All right, so I hope this doesn't confuse anything, but I'm going to talk just slightly about trends when it comes to, we've heard of the 100-year return, 100-year event, or a 500-year rainfall event. This is looking at just 20-year return levels of precipitation, so a 20-year return frequency. And quite honestly, the 20, 50, 100 should all sort of follow in the same, at least going up in this case for Kansas in each of these seasons. And what we see here is in the 20-year return frequency in terms of precipitation, we're increasing mostly in the winter. In this case, winter and in spring, all seasons really show an increase. Now, also understand this is Kansas lumped together with Oklahoma and Texas. So don't automatically think that you're going up that much in each of these seasons. In fact, we just looked at that in terms of seasonality with precipitation in Kansas. It's not as drastic as this is showing. I think those more drastic numbers are down in Texas, to be honest with you. But you're being influenced, if you will, because you're lumped together with those Southern Plains states. Anyway, the point is that yes, a 20-year return level of precipitation has increased. So in other words, 10 years ago, you might have said the 20-year return amount is 2 inches. Now we would say 2.48 or something like that. So it has increased. So the amount we expect at each of those frequency or thresholds has increased over time, not surprisingly. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here on us. These next few slides come from our calculations. Every 30 years, we recalculate a 30-year period of averages. So every 10 years. So the last time we did was 1981 to 2010. Now we've just updated them from 1991 through 2020. So that's a 30-year period. We're looking at. There are certain industries and decisions that are made on 30-year intervals. That's why we do that. We don't take the whole period of record back to 1880 or whatever and calculate an average. We can, and you can calculate it that way. But the 30-year period is used by energy and a few other groups to get a better handle on what's happening now in terms of what to expect. So it's a moving average, if you will, over time. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a few maps. What I'm showing you right here is the latest 30-year period compared to the 80s through 2010 period. So where you see on the left map green, that's an increase in the last 30 years in terms of precipitation. Where you see brown or light brown or tan is a decrease. Then we're really comparing when it's all said and done. What we're really comparing here is the 80s to the 20 teens, if you will, those two 10-year, because the middle 20 years are the same. So bear with me. The Southwest U.S. drier. The Northern Plains, Midwest, sort of Ohio Valley area, Southeast for that matter, and Northeast, wetter, especially in the Northern Plains. On the other side, the other map on the right, that map indicates where temperatures are changing or have changed. Again, basically the last 30 years compared to the 30 years before that. And really it's the 80s compared to the 20 teens. Actually, temperatures in the Northern Plains have actually slightly cooled off a little bit, whereas the majority of the U.S. has seen quite a bit of increase in terms of temperature. Okay, and again, that's the 30-year period. So now, a different way of looking at the same information, but getting rid of that last 30 year, or getting rid of the 81 through 2010, but comparing it to 1901 to 2000. So now we're comparing the last 30 years to the last century, if you will. And where you see green on the left-hand map are increases in percentage of precipitation. So pretty dominant greenery, if you will, especially in the upper Midwest and Northern Plains, but also in Kansas. Quite a bit wetter over time, and we've already showed this on those sort of trend maps. Just wanted to make sure you saw this also in the when we're looking at the last 30 years compared to the last 30. And so also with temperature, you see Western Kansas warming. Well, yeah, a little bit more than the rest of it, but really Western U.S., especially Southwest and the northern tier of U.S. warming quite a bit faster than other parts in the South and Southeast. All right, I'm not sure where I am on time, but I'll just keep going. This is the 30-year average compared to every other 30-year average from 1901 through the last 30 years. And so what you're really doing here is looking at the average over 1901 to 1930 in terms of precipitation. This is precip. Green is above normal, brown is below normal. And again, we're comparing it, we're comparing those years. So only 1901 to 1930. Now we move to 1911 to 1940. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. I didn't say that right. We're comparing each of those 30-year periods to the 100-year 20th century average. Sorry about that. So anyway, you can see how things change over time. You can see the middle part of the country, especially Kansas, dry out in the center part of the in the middle part of the century, really dry out during the Dust Bowl, as you well know. And then as we kind of move into 1970s and 80s, and then 90s, and certainly since about 1971 and later, conditions have gotten somewhat wetter. Okay. And the same can be true, same can be said with temperature. So that's precip right there. This is temperature, changes in temperature over this period of time. And then we're comparing 20th century, again, each of those 30-year periods to the 100-year 20th century average. So quite a bit warmer across the country in the last 40 years, really. All right, so I've made it to the billion-dollar disaster part. If you don't know about this, we in NOAA, and specifically there's a group that I work with in the National Centers for Environmental Information that keep track of really bad climate and weather events. And so this is 2021 so far in terms of those very, very, very costly and often cost lives as well as property events that have hit the U.S. this particular year. We do this, we've done this since about 1980, and I'll show you what a graphic looks like, or that graphic looks like in terms of trend, in terms of billion-dollar events. These are inflation adjusted, by the way. So it's not that 1980 were cheaper or less than $1 billion. Everything is inflation adjusted and all that business. But there's a definite trend in terms of different types of weather and climate events. You can look there and see, for example, severe storm count and damage from severe storms is increased considerably. Same with tropical cyclone events and damages from those. And there's lots of reasons for that. Lots of reasons for these things happening that way. What I wanted to do is very quickly show you what Kansas looks like. Excuse me, because we can break it down now in terms of how that looks, how that time series, if you will, looks in Kansas in terms of events. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that some of these events aren't just Kansas alone. In fact, most of them aren't. If you're talking a drought, for example, it's not usually only Kansas that gets counted in the $1 billion disaster. It's Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas. It's everybody all having a drought at the same time. It all equals up to $1 billion. But anyway, this is what it looks like for Kansas. If you break it out alone, all of this stuff also, let me see if I have this on here. Yeah. So I have the website down there at the very bottom. If you want to go look at this kind of stuff yourself, you can. Soon, we're going to have this broken down into county level information as well. There's a lot more information than I have time to show you and ways of graphing this stuff that could make more sense to you. So again, you could probably type in NOAA $1 billion disasters and in Google and find it faster than using the URL I've provided you. This graphic simply just shows you when it's most or when in the past we've had different types of disasters in Kansas. And it's not surprising to see that in April, May, and June, we're dominated by severe storms, right? And same with flooding. That tends to be when the flooding occurs is late spring, early summer in terms of those types of things. So drought is sort of year round, although June, July, August seem to be, for a lot of reasons, when drought is most prevalent across Kansas. Makes sense there too. And then finally, is in terms of frequency and how often these things occur, again, just in Kansas, is you see you have a greater than 50, about a 50-50 shot every May of having some part of a $1 billion disaster. Also in June, greater than 50. And it's basically a way, if you want, to look at when they occur during the year. They can occur any time of year, obviously, but depending upon the time of year, it can be a lot less. February, for example, a lot less than June. Nearing the end here. One thing we also do is monitor the climate on a monthly basis, and this is just an example of the latest one from October. We're ranking all the states on the left and right, actually, in terms of temperature on the left and precipitation on the right in terms of the period of record. So, for example, in this case, it was a warm month in October for the state of Kansas when you average everything out across the whole state over all 31 days. If you look at Ohio, they've never been warmer in October. Same with Maryland, for that matter. 127 out of 127 years. It's never been warmer. And actually, that's what the shading means, where you get cooler than normal. You see on the West Coast and sort of Western US, there's a few lower numbers. Those are closer to cooler, below normal temperatures. On the right, you see precipitation average or precipitation rankings for each state. The higher the number there, so the closer you get to 127, the closer you are to the record. And actually, basically, when you ever see shading there in terms of green, it's above normal in terms of precipitation for the most part. So, a little better than normal in terms of wetness across Kansas during that time. Finally, the winter outlook. I know everybody wants to know what's going to happen, and I'm going to say that I don't know, but I'm going to show you what we think we know. This is a La Nina year that we're involved with in terms of tropical kind of what we call teleconnections or tropical influence And really it's the equator, it's the Pacific equator cooling off below normal, which influences our jet stream and everything else. So this is sort of typical. Now, what I would say about Kansas is it's sort of in the unknown zone, kind of like Nebraska. There's a lot of unknowns in this part. If you go to the north, the tendency is to be cooler than normal. If you go to our south, it tends to be somewhat warmer than normal during a La Nina year. Now, that doesn't always happen. These are guidelines, right? This is the outlook as of today. Tomorrow it's going to change, by the way, because the new seasonal outlooks will be out tomorrow. The outlook for Kansas is for, and it's not a very high probability, by the way, so I want to let you know that too, is for there's a slightly enhanced chance for warmer than normal conditions. And we're talking December, January, February so far. And then in terms of precipitation, golly, it's just white, which means equal chances of below, above, and near normal. So we're not really saying one way or the other. What I will also say though, as you go further into the winter and spring, the likelihood of dryness creeping in, especially to western Kansas and southern Kansas, increases. Although I don't show those maps on here, that's the way it normally plays out. So La Nina years tend to be cool to the north and tend to be wet as you go north and west, and the Ohio Basin and Great Lakes. They tend to be dry and warm across the southern tier of states. Now, that's my final slide. If you want to contact me, there's my email address. We do have, like I just told you, a monthly webinar that we do. I didn't put how to register for that on here. Maybe I'll put it in the notes or send it to somebody, but anybody can get on these things. We do it once a month. We talk about the whole north central part of the US. So it's not just Kansas, although Kansas is included in the general discussions. Just want to let you know that we offer that kind of information. So if you want to get on that list, you can write to me. I'll put you on my general list, and you'll get this information. You'll get some other stuff from NOAA that's sort of regional, if you will. And you can always take yourself off if you say, oh, this isn't the stuff I want. But anyway, thank you very much. If I have any time, I'll answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Doug, this is Matt Unruh from the Kansas Water Office. Thank you for that presentation. Appreciate the opportunity to get up to speed on where things are as far as upcoming forecasts for our climate-related conditions, as well as a look in the past and the trends that we're experiencing, both from a precipitation and temperature standpoint. So I'm going to be helping to moderate questions for your presentation here, and we do have about 10 minutes worth of time for Q&A. So what I'm planning on doing is going back through chat, and there's a lot of good questions that have been submitted in chat. So we'll just go back through the questions that have been submitted in chat, and I'll read them to you, Doug. And when you have a chance to sort of gather your thoughts, you can respond to some of the questions that we've received in chat up to this point. So going back to the first question that was submitted, and this would be from Brian Kelly. He asked, how much of an increase in energy does 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature represent over a year? If possible, please discuss in terms of some kind of reference, such as nuclear bombs, total energy production of the world over a year, et cetera. And thank you. So from your standpoint, could you sort of, I guess, provide some additional context into the amount of energy that's involved in sort of that 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature over a year?
Oh my gosh, you're killing me here. I would have to actually look into that a lot more than I currently know. So Brian, I do know you. We can talk about this offline. A lot. I'll just say a lot, because 1 degree, during the climate accords and such that they're going through, they're trying to keep it down to 1.5 degrees. They think that in and of itself will be catastrophic for the world for various reasons. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to energy, how much energy that actually equates to. It's an incredible amount. We don't think of it that much, especially if it's 1 degree in the wintertime. We think, wow, that's great. It won't be so cold. I won't have to turn my furnace on as much. I'll be much more comfortable. et cetera. Well, it really equates to a lot of other issues, maybe not in our backyard, but in other places. Now, the thing I would say, though, is that there are some complications from not having a harsh winter. and some of those are pests and diseases. And if you're talking in agriculture, that kind of angle, there is a good reason to have some harsh temperatures during the winter time, including invasive species that we don't want moving into our neck of the woods. So I think I'll leave it at that, Brian, because I can't get in. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. Those are good questions, though. So I think it's like 1 point. Someone probably knows this, and please put it in the chat. 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit equals at 1 degree Celsius, or is it 1.6? I've forgotten over the years.
Yeah, appreciate that question, Brian. So be prepared for some follow-up opportunities for additional discussion with Doug offline on that one between the two of you. So next question I see in chat is from Stephanie Royer, and this really gets to sort of the methodology utilized for some of your statistical analysis. So the question is, do you ever work with median numbers instead of averages when it comes to evaluation of temperature and precipitation data? And maybe could you maybe sort of provide some additional perspective regarding averages versus medians and what's appropriate in various settings?
Yeah, so that's a question we get a lot in terms of how come we don't use more median, and really depends on the question that really depends on the decision trying to be made. So if you're saying, because there are certain events will really skew the data one way or the other with averages. So 2012, for example, a record hot year, probably bumped up temperatures a lot, and what you'd rather know is how many times, how many times in the last, I don't know, 30 years have we actually reached 100 degrees, or some real threshold that matters to you. So I understand the use of using medians as opposed to averages. I'm trying to think if we do that somewhere on our websites, and I know some places do. I'm not used to using medians in terms of giving these presentations very often. I definitely understand the need for it. I'm trying to remember if we, I'm trying to remember if we provide that on in some good way, and I can't think of how we would do that. That's a good question, and we should look into it more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate that question. So the next question that I see is from Mary Hill, and this relates to precipitation. So for precip, it looks like trends dominated by the droughts of the 30s and early 50s. How robust do you think the precipitation trend is? Could future droughts alter the conclusion that average precipitation is increasing?
Could future droughts? So yeah, droughts not going away, by the way. So I guess I can speak to that a little bit. The best way I would answer that is to say we're still going to go through major droughts. And even though, well, and again, remember how this precipitation is increasing. It's increasing in southeastern Kansas by far the most. Let me go back to that, by the way. Where do we have there? In southeast Kansas the most, and least in the northwest, where it's where they need the water. I'm not going to say more than, but equally at least to other parts of Kansas. So one thing that's happening is as temperatures warm up, right, it can hold a lot more water. The air, the atmosphere can hold a lot more water. In fact, I have a graphic I appended to the end of all this. This sort of shows it's almost logarithmically. So every degree you go up, you can hold an extreme amount more water. That's why we see these heavy rainfall events happening more often. One of the worries that we have going forward, if it warms up that 1.5 degrees Celsius, which I did look up, by the way, while we were off the air, or while the questions were being asked, 1.8 degrees more or less Fahrenheit equals 1 degree of Celsius. Anyway, so if we actually increase that much, we're getting a lot more evaporation and evapotranspiration from plants, as well as just evaporation from wind or solar and everything else heating up the planet. Even with an increase in precipitation in the Northwest, one of the worries is that it won't be enough to keep up with the amount of evaporation and evapotranspiration especially during the warm time of year. What does that mean overall for droughts? I don't, some years are wetter than, like 2018, 2019 were extremely wet over most of the country, or most of the country, especially in the center part of the country. That was very unusual. Is that the shape of things to come? Well, what I'd say, and people ask me the same question, is 2012 going to be what we're going to expect in the rest, for the rest of our lifetime? And of course, the answer is no. Not every year is going to look like that. Are we more variable than we used to? Well, living in Kansas, you better know that your weather and your climate's quite variable from day to day to year and all that business, right? So I expect, and it would be anything, it shouldn't surprise you, even looking at these graphs, the way the precipitation goes up one year and down the next, that we're going to have extremes on both sides in terms of way too much water, which we saw in 2019, and way too little water in 2012. That is the nature of where we live. But there have been a couple studies done looking at the Missouri River Basin, showing that variability in this case, it was runoff, but we'll just say precipitation too, has increased since the 70s, has increased to the high side, which kind of fits in with the more precipitation. In other words, when there's a lot more runoff coming off during the wet years than we have seen in the past. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but there's a few nuggets in there I think that is worth considering.
Appreciate that. Thank you for the question, Mary. So we might have time for one more question. So I guess beyond this question, Doug, I'm not sure what your additional obligations are for the rest of the day, but if you have time beyond sort of our open Q&A session, if there's the opportunity for you to try to maybe answer some of the questions in the chat, or if there's any additional information you think that you would want to plug in, I'll leave that up to you, what your scheduling availability might be for the rest of the day beyond this. And if you're able to get to any of the questions, we definitely would appreciate that. If not, we'll try to loop back around with you maybe with some follow-up on these. So the last question before we start moving on to our next speakers would be in relation to the precipitation related information and the averages associated with that. Is that information specific for rain or snow, or could you maybe provide some additional perspective regarding sort of those totals that are noted as far as the averages for precip, what all that accounts for?
Oh, it accounts for all types. Yep. And you, by the way, when I showed the season, I guess I can't show them to you right now, but when I showed you the seasonal trends, the winter being a lot less per decade than in spring or summer for that matter. Well, let's think about how much it actually precipitates in terms of snow when it all melts down and how much it actually rains. Winter is pretty much our driest season anyway. So you'd have to almost look at that as increase in percentage. How much have we increased in terms of percentage during the winter as opposed to spring? And I didn't break it down that way. I just put in actual numbers. So again, I would expect winter increases always in terms of inches, whether it's snow or rain or ice for that matter, to be less than increases in spring and summer for the most part. You just have less precipitation to work with. But yes, everything, it's all measured together. It's not just rain.
Right. Very good. Appreciate that question.
And I'll be around. I'll be around till 3. I have to leave at 3. But I'll try to answer some questions in there. Thank you.
Very good. Appreciate that, Doug. And appreciate all the questions and the information discussed over the course of our Q&A as well as in your presentation, Doug. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Director Connie Owen, and she will introduce our next speakers. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you, Matt. We are fortunate to welcome leadership from the House Water Committee. Chairman Ron Highland and Ranking Member Lindsay Vaughn are here to give us an update on the activities of the House Water Committee. So, Chairman Highland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Connie. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, here we go. Actually, we worked this out that Representative Vaughn is going to go first. We've decided we'll have beauty before age. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you guys hear me okay? Good, all right. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here. We've really delved into the issue of water this year, and I think it's become a really important issue to both of us. And so it's exciting to be in a room full of water advocates who care about protection and management of water in Kansas. So we're excited to be here. Through our committee work, we've really realized and identified how this is a statewide issue impacting both the eastern, western, and central parts of the state, something I'm sure you all are very familiar with. Kind of the topics that we've delved into are really quantity and quality. Again, I know you guys are probably pretty familiar with this. So I'll just do kind of a brief overview of what we realized have been some of the core issues of the challenges that we're facing going forward. And I think the chair will talk more about our committee specific work and what we hope to accomplish going forward, and then talking about some next steps too. So in terms of quantity, it sounds like we heard a little bit about that in the last presentation, but really focusing on our aquifers and extending the usable life of our aquifers, and then our reservoirs, and focusing on sedimentation and ways that we can desilt them in order to expand their usable life as well. So both finding ways to further the life of many of our usable water sources and supplies, and then also looking at quality. We did have an interim meeting, and we saw the impact of uranium contamination in water supplies in Western Kansas. We have nitrogen and phosphorus in our reservoirs and lakes and ponds across the state. And then also, looking at things like, what are the impact of pipes with lead? Is that really a relevant issue, or what does the scope of that look like in our state at this time? So there are a lot of issues with both quality and quantity that we've dived into, and are hopeful that we can make some legislative impact in the coming session. So with that, I will turn it over to the chair, who will talk more about our committee work.
Thank you, Lindsay. The committee activities, we were presented with by leadership to look at water. And so we started in on this. And one thing we learned very quickly is that it's a very complicated topic to discuss. We looked at it. And so we had research give us an overview, and we found out there are 16 state agencies or offices involved with water and 7 federal. And that was daunting enough just to learn that. But what we did at that point was we invited every one of them in to talk to our committee. And we asked them to provide their mission statement, explain what they do, how they do it. We wanted to understand their budget, and we wanted to know how their reporting scheme. What that ended up being was, within all of that information, that ended up being over 200 megabytes of information. And anyone can go look at all of that information we gathered by going to the Kansas Legislative website. And Connie at some point can show you how to do that. But with that information, everybody was engaged in the committee. Everybody was involved. It was a wonderful experience for the year. A lot of information, obviously. So what did we find out? We found out that there is some overlap between these agencies, and we wanted to try to minimize that in the future, streamline, if you will, but to make it more functional, so that anyone in the state, if they have questions or wanted information about water in our state, they could find it easily. So that's one of our goals. We found that funding is complicated and confusing at times. And so we wanted to try to find we know that funding is inadequate, has been for years. The estimate is upwards of $71 million. that we were supposed to have received for water projects did not make it through the system. And we need to develop a conservation emphasis throughout our state. So what are our goals for next session? We want to implement those conservation plans across our state. We want to find a funding stream and then protect that stream of money by putting it into a trust fund. And that's one of our goals, and we're going to work very hard on that one. And then we'll look and see if the entire system can be streamlined, become more functional. We would like to have a single contact point for anybody that wants to find information on water. And then they could be led to another agency if need be. And action items to date. This is Representative Vaughn's favorite thing, action items. But the first one is for all the committee members to engage in speaking engagements, speak wherever they're invited to talk about the water and the problems we've found and maybe some of the solution suggestions. But we want to hear from everybody in the state what their ideas are. Nobody has all the answers. We need to hear from as many people as possible during this decision process. We have newspaper articles, what we're calling public awareness articles or op-eds that Lindsay has been working on very hard. These will start hitting the press and the newspapers, hopefully within this month. But we will be doing that to make everybody aware. And what we want from that is that the public gets involved and they understand the complexity of this issue, and we want them to be engaged, contact their legislators, representatives, their senators, all of them. The legislative process is difficult at times, and the more folks that we have involved and understand it, the easier it'll go through. The squeaky wheel, if you will. So we're trying to create as much squeak as we can. And then we'll have bill introduction. We're working on a bill so that we can take care of some of these things. And how that process works is we have hearings first, and we will notify the public at that point. They can come in and speak. And now in this new age of technology, they actually don't have to be in the room. We like to see them, but if it's imposition, we have the technology now that we can have those hearings in Topeka, but you can be somewhere else. It's actually worked out very great. I have pestered IT for years, trying to get them to get this system in place. It's now here, it's working. We've had many compliments from all over the state. They did not have to travel to Topeka, but they know what's going on. All the information is available. Everything the legislator sees, you can see. And you can read it, you can digest it, whatever, but it's all out there at the legislative website now. Once we've had our hearings, then we go into what we call working the bill as a committee. And this is where the conversations get passionate at times. One legislator trying to convince another when they have the right ideas, whatever, but it's a great system. It works well. But we finally come with a bill that we all agree on, or the majority agrees on. And we vote it out and we send it to the House floor. That next step is the House then will meet as a committee, an entire committee, all 125 members. And then they debate the issue. And then they vote. And then the next day, 24 hours later, we have what's called the final action. And that is the final vote. And if it's a positive vote, then it moves to the Senate for consideration. We lobby right now. We're lobbying our senators and other legislators to make them aware of all this so that they know it's not a big surprise. Nobody likes big surprises. So we're working to keep them apprised of what's going on. And that, folks, is what we are working on. And we've been working all year on this. Connie?
Representative
Thank you,
Highland.
Chairman Highland. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just chiming in here. I was going to say thank you as well, Representative Highland and Representative Vaughn. So we do have a few minutes for Q&A for both of you, if you both are available and interested in fielding some of the questions that have come in chat. So I do see one agency-related question in the chat following the climate related discussion. So this would be a question from Mike Armstrong. And his comment is 16 agencies dealing with water seems like a lot. Should Kansas consider consolidating some of those agencies? So that would be the first question.
We looked at that very closely, and unfortunately I can't show you the graph now, or not the graph, but the graphics showing you all these different agencies and the overlap. Every agency has their purpose, but what we want to eliminate is the cross-pollination or two agencies dealing in the same area. We want to streamline that so one agency is dealing with one issue and we don't get into these spats, which agency is in charge of it. So we're looking at that very closely. It is a lot. There are three main groups and we're looking to consolidate within those three.
Very good. Appreciate that, Representative Highland. Thank you for the question, Mike. I'm not seeing any other questions up to this point in chat in relation to house water related activities. So I guess, well, let me take that back. Okay, well, this is follow up on climate. So I guess with all of that information said, Representative Highland and Vaughn, I mean, is there anything else that you would consider as far as items that people should be on the lookout as far as this upcoming legislative session? And then there is a comment or question that just came in from Don Bueller as well regarding what is the best way to have the public get engaged. So I was sort of tying into that question as far as the upcoming legislative session. Do you have any suggestions on how the public can get engaged, either with house water related activities or just legislatively?
Well, I think one of the most important things they can do, and I will put in the chat the address for the legislative website. That is where you get all of the information, what's going on. In fact, now you can hit the video button and you can watch every committee. You pick your committees. They're on both YouTube and WebEx. And I will put secondly another address that will take you directly to the Water Committee website, where you can get and review all of the information that we saw during the session.
And if I may, in response to Don's question, I would jump in there too and say, you guys are some of the biggest advocates for water in the state, and we're really also relying on you all to help raise the profile of this issue as we go into the legislative session and hope to take meaningful action on these issues. So as we, have editorials in the paper or have events that we're speaking at, or other ways that you all are engaging with water in the state, we encourage you to share that with your networks and really help with that PR element of water going into the session. So we're relying on your expertise and advocacy as well. And then, also encourage you to, as the chair said, reach out to your legislators, tell them about the issues that you care about most, especially those on our committee in terms of water issues, and then encourage you to testify going into session, like the chair mentioned. So if we have public hearings or bill hearings, it really encourage you to get involved and share your testimony and perspective on these important issues too.
Very good. Appreciate that. So I do see there are a couple more questions, but we are running up against the time clock as far as available time that we have for Q&A. So we might have time for one more question. So the next one that I'm seeing on chat, at least on my end, is from Tom Bright. And this is in relation to the Kansas aqueduct. So is there ever any chat at the state level about the Army Corps of Engineers Kansas aqueduct to pump water from the Missouri River to western Kansas? So I guess speaking from a legislative standpoint, what have you heard in relation to the Kansas aqueduct proposal, and I guess any sort of perspective or insight that either of you might be willing to provide on that particular topic?
Well, you're talking big bucks, number one. And yes, we have discussed this at the committee meeting we had in Garden City. That topic was brought up more than once, and the need for it. because it's also involving waterways, they're talking federal, it will be a difficult process, number one. Number two, the cost. And so it has not been brought to the legislature as a possibility at this time. That doesn't mean it won't happen in the future.
Appreciate that. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your time, Representative Highland and Representative Vaughn. And it looks like with our schedule currently, we're right up against 2:45. So I apologize that we weren't able to get to some of the other questions in chat. Representative Highland and Representative Vaughn, if there are other questions we receive, would you be interested in us coordinating with you on those particular questions and who was submitting them and providing any sort of response back to them?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I'd be
very
happy
good.
to.
Well, we'll take note of the remaining questions in chat and follow up with Representative Highland and Vaughn and follow up with those individuals regarding responses from them. So appreciate that and appreciate your time. So
Thank you, Matt.
with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things back over to Connie Owen, and we will be gearing up for our next presenter at this time.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Chairman Highland, and thank you, Representative Vaughn. And I appreciate the participation with the questions. They were just getting fired up. So there's never enough time for everything we want to talk about. And thank you, Matt, for helping facilitate that. Our next featured speaker is Rob Manus. He's the State Director of the Nature Conservancy, the Kansas chapter. He's been with the Nature Conservancy since 2005 and was named State Director for Kansas in 2011. He's responsible for all aspects of TNC's work in Kansas, including conservation, administration, and fundraising. Rob has spent more than 35 years in the conservation field, including 20 with Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. He represents TNC on several national and federal boards, including the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Rob holds a master's degree in environmental science from Friends University. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Connie. I appreciate it. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Great. And Connie, I'm going to do something that makes people who run these kind of things really nervous. I'm going to ask to share my screen. Is that okay?
I will need to have my electronics wizards deal with that particular question. So I guess we got to look to the chat to see if that can be managed.
Well, why don't I start while we're working that out? And if I can, it's okay. I've done this with no visuals before, and I can certainly do it again. So that's not a problem. Go ahead and share. I see from Katie. Okay, I'll do that then. Is that showing up okay?
I can see it.
All right, very good. So this is a conversation about money and about economy and about quality of life and health and wildlife and agriculture. And it started many years ago in a conversation between Mike Beam and I, Mike Beam at that time was with the Kansas Livestock Association and was the executive director of the Ranchland Trust. And Mike and I were having a conversation about the fact that there is a fair amount of private and government money out there for conservation that Kansas couldn't capture because there was no state source of funds like virtually every state around us had. And that led to a conversation between Mike and I and a handful of our trustees, most of whom were involved in agriculture at the time, but that was maybe coincidental, I don't know. And we began to talk about how we could come up with a little bit of money to match some of these sources so we could do conservation on natural lands and agricultural lands in Kansas. Very quickly, because I'm not as smart as Mike is, we realized that this idea that we had was bigger than just the little universe that we were thinking about, and that it had something to do with virtually every Kansan and every corner of our state and every facet of our economy and the wonderful life that we're blessed to enjoy here in Kansas. And we started to realize what we needed here was a course correction that affects how we make our lives and our livelihoods, and how we enjoy our lives and how we build our families and our communities. Very big question. So Mike and I and this merry band of trustees from our respective organizations started to ask others if they would join in with this. And it became this very diverse coalition of people, some of whom didn't agree with each other but on many of the details, but they agreed on one thing, and that is that Kansas has for a long, long time, as in always, underinvested in conservation. And I mean conservation in the very broadest sense. Everything from butterfly watching to soil conservation, and from grazing land management to quail hunting. And Kansas has this long history of underinvesting in it in many respects. So we thought maybe this was just our opinion, this 20 or 30 people that we had in this coalition. So we hired a pollster company. I can't remember the name right off, but if anybody wants to know, I'll find it for you. A very well-known and credible polling company to ask Kansans what they thought about this nature of this issue of our lack of spending on conservation in Kansas. And this poll was long and drawn out, and I'll share with you the details, but there are 3 or 4 points that came out of it that I want to share with you. First off, people of every walk, men, women, every generation, every part of the state, east to west, north to south, Republicans, Democrats, all said being in nature is important. It's not a big shocker, I guess. Here's one that was really plain, really overt, and a little bit surprising to me. People said, you know, I'm more likely to vote for a legislator or any government candidate for government office if they support increased spending on conservation, natural resources and recreation. A lot more likely to vote for them. Well, that was a surprise. This one surprised me a bit, but shouldn't have, and that is that of all the conservation that we could contemplate, soil, wildlife, air, soil carbon, whatever sort of conservation we can contemplate, virtually every single Kansan is concerned about how well we're funding water conservation in the state. That was true across any sort of demographic or political line you could think of. And you're welcome, Mr. Highland. So what did this poll reveal, and what did our coalition identify that Kansans want and need under this broad heading of conservation and conservation spending? Again, water comes to the very top. And I want to talk about these in 3 categories, sort of land and water conservation, recreation, and agriculture. Because I think it's a mistake to talk about conservation in Kansas without giving a nod to the dominant importance of agriculture. So ground and surface water recovery and stability, people worry about that all across the state. The further west you go, perhaps the more they do, but virtually every corner of the state is concerned about that. Soil health and water quality, which are inextricably linked. When we take good care of the soil, we take good care of the water. Another one that surprised me a bit was improved dam and watershed management. The way dams are managed turns out has a huge impact on the health of streams and the quality of water that downstreams communities and families can access. Flood prevention, things like how the health of the stream bed, the natural flow of a stream, and wetlands are hugely important, it turns out, for flood prevention. This one, after some of the Over 1 million acres that burned a few years ago in South Central Kansas shouldn't surprise anyone. But I want to come back to this fire management in a bit. But our lack of managing fire in some parts of the state not only degrades rangeland health and costs us a lot of money out of our economy, but also sets us up for catastrophic fires. And then related to that, just restoration of degraded grazing lands. And then lastly, there are so many things to be gained by proactively managing habitats or species that are in trouble. Regulatory certainty, cost savings, and enjoyment for people who like wildlife. So I mentioned economic development was one of the headings I want to talk about. I'm just going to very quickly go through some quality of life and economic development opportunities, and some of these will overlap, so forgive me for that. People are really frustrated with the lack of access to trails and natural areas in the state. Kansas has always been a big state for hunting and angling. Campers and hikers were very vociferous about their inability to access recreational opportunities in the state. Our county and local and state recreation facilities are ones, and I'll talk about this more in a minute. These are recreational facilities and opportunities for which there is a ton of money if we can just come up with a little bit of money to match on the state side. Improved outdoor and environmental education opportunities. As we become an increasingly urban state, this becomes increasingly important. People have less access to it when they live further from it and deeper in the cities. Again, more outdoor opportunities near population centers. And there are increased employment opportunities and economic development opportunities if we take better care of our agriculture and outdoor recreation opportunities. And I want to talk just a little bit specifically about agriculture. As I said, it's hugely important to us from a conservation standpoint, also from an economic and recreation standpoint. Irrigation efficiency. The Nature Conservancy is working right now with a group of farmers out in the Rattlesnake Creek Basin right now who are progressive minded, who are doing their very best to be efficient with their irrigation, and who could use some help. This is expensive technology in many cases, and the cost of switching to it can be expensive. So irrigation efficiency is one of the top places we need to invest in conservation and water conservation in Kansas. Grazing land rest, rotation, and management. Again, switching to some of these systems is not cost-free. Soil health and stability. Once again, if we ask agricultural producers to make changes that benefit the public, and these changes all benefit the public, perhaps the state of Kansas should invest in some of those changes. Jobs and sustainable agriculture. Soil carbon markets. I think we solve a whole bunch of our problems if we ever once can figure out how to properly monetize soil carbon in this state. Farmers and ranchers are sitting on the key to many doors in soil carbon. Expanded agricultural tourism. People from around the country talk about the wonderful agricultural lifestyle and economy that we have. We should share it with them more. And restoration of marginal and unproductive lands. I may come back to that one in just a little bit. A lot of this is about lands that we've decided to set aside in the Conservation Reserve Program and other places, and we can do better things than returning those in some cases to farmland. It's not at no cost. So I mentioned that there are other sources of funding, and I'm going to go through these really quickly because it's not so important to understand what they are or even what the acronyms mean behind them. The key here is there's a whole lot of money sitting out there that we could capture that we're not because the state of Kansas doesn't put money up for it. And here's just a handful of them. This is not all of them. The Land and Water Conservation Fund appropriates $900 million annually nationwide. USDA's RCCP program is $300 million. The Agricultural Conservation Easement Program is $450 million. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's North American Waterfowl Conservation Act is $60 million, and on and on. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the USD Department of Interior Legacy Conservation Areas, Department of Defense Sentinel Landscapes, and there are at least this many more that I'm not listing. The take-home message is here, this is a lot of money that Kansas leaves on the table to the detriment of conservation, our economy, our agricultural culture, and to the people of Kansas. Other states are doing this, and some have been doing it for a long time. Some examples. Missouri generates $90 million a year and just reauthorized this 0.1% of existing sale taxes. Arkansas uses a portion of its sale taxes. They generate 40 to 60 million annually for these kind of causes. Minnesota's is over 100 million at 3/8 of 1% sales tax increase, well over 100 million. And Nebraska, using a portion of its lottery funds, has generated 320 million over the last couple of decades. If these states can do it, we can do it. So where do we get this money? Somebody asks, and my short answer to that is, I don't know. But I can tell you what voters said in the polls that they might support. Oh, by the way, how much are we looking for? The governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force on water a couple of years ago said we need over $50 million just to span the water conservation gap. And I would just say that $50 million, based on what the polling said, based on what Kansans said, is a pretty small price tag for the problems that we need to solve in the water realm. And there's also recreation, soil health, fisheries and wildlife conservation, and agricultural conservation. So this could be a very large price tag, but as I just showed you in the illustrations from the other states, this can be done. So what the voters say about it? They said, well, how about let's redirect a portion of existing taxes? How about gaming taxes? What about a slight increase in our taxes? How about new taxes on sporting goods or outdoor equipment? Other things that came up were real estate transfer taxes that people would support, the people of Kansas would support. It's a big price tag. Our voters say it's important. The people of Kansas say that they'll vote for elected officials who support these kinds of things. And with that, I'm going to quit. Be glad to stand for questions, discussion, advice, and counsel would be welcome as well. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. And again, this is Matt Unruh from the Kansas Water Office, and I'll be helping to facilitate any Q&A that we get from questions that are submitted via chat. So we'll give individuals that are interested some time to sort of gather their thoughts and provide questions in Q&A. So I guess one question I would have for you, Rob, in relation to, I guess, further leveraging of resources to advance conservation in the state. Based off of your personal opinion, I mean, is there anything that you see that we can be doing from a state standpoint to better position ourselves to leverage those potential outside resources, whether those are federal dollars or any number of sources, in addition to increased financial contribution to conservation efforts?
That's not exactly a softball question for me to warm up on, Matt, but I'll give it a shot. One of the things that stands out to me most is that because for lack of spending just a little bit of money, and $1 million is not a little bit of money to somebody like me, but a few $1 million, we could stop turning away some of the USDA funds that we've turned back. The USDA in Kansas has not spent all of the money it could have had on agricultural conservation programs in recent years, simply because we haven't spent a few millions of dollars to match it. And I think we could figure that out fairly quickly. Second to that, I think that we have allowed ourselves to erode some of the money that we were spending on state water conservation. We could just stop doing some of those things. That's sort of low-hanging fruit type opportunities. I talked a lot there, Matt. I have no idea if I answered your question.
No, that's great. Appreciate that additional perspective there. So we do have some questions that are starting to come in via chat right now. And the first one showing up on my end is from Don Bueller. So in relation to this overall discussion, what are some of the next steps for us to move this conversation forward? How can we help? So just advancing the conversation and moving towards action, what can we do?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Don's a great colleague, by the way, and a real champion of conservation for Kansas. She's also somebody, by the way, who I know believes, like I do, that conservation has to be not just for nature, but it also has to be for people. So thanks, Don. And I would just say this, it sounds cliche, but the next step is to begin to talk to our elected officials about this. None of this is going to happen without a decision by the Kansas Legislature and the executive branch of our government. And so if this is important to you, if conserving agricultural soils and grazing lands, if hunting, fishing, hiking, and outdoor recreation opportunities are important to you, it's time to start talking to your legislators about it. This coalition is doing that in a very tactical form, talking to legislative leaders. I was really blessed to have a great conversation with Representative Highland not long ago, who's a neighbor of mine, and I learned a great deal from him. And I think he and I have a common vision about the future of water conservation in Kansas. But I mean, that's really it. The other thing I would say is get involved in this discussion. Tell us what we're missing. Help us refine our message. Help us refine a list of outcomes that people are willing to pay for. It's not free.
Appreciate the question, Don. Next up, we have a question. This is from Steve Adams. So Rob, could you talk about the match and cash flow needed to fully leverage the grant programs you listed? So sort of maybe a follow-up to my initial question, what would sort of those match and cash flow obligations needed to fully leverage those resources? What are some of the things that are on your radar there?
Yeah, so the big places where we're missing money or about to be missing money, you know, Congress gave a huge boost to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is authorized up to $900 million a year for the nation. And in order for us to capture that specific pot of funding, for example, we have to put money into our state park system. We have to put money into local and county parks because that money is specifically designated to leverage those kinds of recreational facilities. We also need to be thinking about where do we want to spend money on things like natural areas, on preservation of privately owned natural lands. Where is the state of Kansas willing to invest with the federal government in keeping natural areas natural? And some of that money can also go into things like national wildlife refuges, which, back to the Rattlesnake Creek example, we may need to spend some money at Quivira National Wildlife Refuge there to improve the water efficiency the water handling efficiency that the refuge has. So I think those kinds of things are where we need to be thinking first about generating additional revenue. And of course, water conservation is always top of mind.
Appreciate that. And thank you for the question, Steve. Another question we just received in chat is from Mike Armstrong. So the question would be, have you considered a 1/10 cent carve off or dedication of the existing sales tax? I believe that would generate about 55 million. So in relation to potential revenue sources for conservation funds, that 1/10 of 1% carve off or dedication of its existing sales tax.
Yes, and thank you. We have, and I've spoken with the past 2-3 governors about this, and you know, a governor is rarely going to be in favor of a new tax, but a piece of existing taxes is certainly a more feasible approach. And 1/10 of 1%, you're absolutely right. You've done the math. Would generate around between $50 and $60 million a year, and would be a heck of a start on the needs that we've identified.
Appreciate that, and thank you for the question, Mike. So I know we do have a few more minutes on our schedule here for questions. And Rob, I'm not sure what your availability looks like, what time you'll have to peel off, but we were looking at here following Q&A, basically having some final thoughts before a break time. So we'd be looking at maybe the opportunity for 1 or 2 more questions potentially if those were to come in chat, if that still works for you, Rob.
Absolutely, I can hang around till then, till break.
All right. Well, maybe while we're waiting on additional questions to be submitted via chat, I might ask you another one. And this is in relation maybe to more nature conservancy related projects or initiatives. Would you have time maybe just to briefly mention some of the water resource related efforts that are taking place in the state under the Kansas Nature Conservancy?
Now that's a very generous question, Matt. So sure, thanks. I'll be unabashedly and unashamedly self-promoting here, I guess. And I would just answer it this way. Again, I'm really proud to work for an organization that's about conserving nature, but that's all about doing it in a way that is compatible with the needs of people. And so I would offer an answer to that question, a handful of examples. I mentioned Rattlesnake Creek. And what we're after there is to avoid regulation and litigation primarily on irrigators in order to supply the needs of a senior water right at Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. And I believe that we can do that, and we can keep the irrigated agriculture economy healthy there in those communities and for those families by efficiency and by some reasonable reductions that don't cut into agricultural production. And the Nature Conservancy has been involved there with bringing money in. We cleared a few thousand acres of water stealing trees along the Rattlesnake Creek, which helped increase flow. We're helping with irrigation efficiency technology there, both with the acquisition and the development and implementation of it. And I'm just really proud of that. And my hat's off to the irrigators in that area who are willing to say, you know what, we can figure this out. We can figure this out in a cooperative manner. My hat's also off to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which has avoided calling for regulatory action to enforce its water right there, which is a senior right to almost all the irrigators. And so, you know, it's kids playing nice in the sandbox and figuring out solutions that don't involve regulators or attorneys. No offense to the attorneys on the call. So that's one thing, Rattlesnake Creek. Another one that I would mention is the Kansas River Sustainable Rivers project we have going on with the Corps of Engineers. And it really boils down to this. The way the dams on the main stem Kansas and its major tributaries were designed to be operated, many of them over 50 years ago, isn't necessarily the best thing for fisheries habitats, wildlife habitats, municipal water supplies, and the health and stability of the river channel. And so by working with the Corps of Engineers and a whole bunch of stakeholders, recreationists, commercial water users, municipal water users, agricultural water users, we believe that we can bring sound science to bear, in many cases affecting fairly minor tweaks in how dams are operated that generate millions and millions of dollars and acres of benefit to the downstream users and to downstream fish and wildlife habitats. And so I'm really proud of our work there. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be involved in that. Two other things I'd mention very quickly, Matt, how much time do I have? Just a couple of minutes? Yeah, so yeah, a couple of minutes. On the Blue River in Kansas City, which is where I am right now at the funeral of a friend. At the Blue River here in Kansas City, there's a lot of development going on, and it's moving south towards the Blue River. The Blue River flows into Kansas City from the southeast, an agricultural area. Those headwaters need to be protected if we want to maintain quality of the Blue River, but also if we want to avoid unnecessarily flood expense in Kansas City and in that area where it flows through. Many landowners along the Blue River have already said to us, yes, we want in, we want to participate, we want to conserve the riverbanks, and we're working with developers in the area to figure out how we develop the land, how we maximize its value, but do it in a manner that avoids unnecessary flooding, that avoids unnecessarily degradation of habitats and water quality. Very proud of our Blue River work. Lastly, I would just mention that most of the streams in Kansas, 3/4 of them, are degraded to the point that they are unfit for one of the designated human uses. And I would say to you all, some of you heard me say this before, I am dadgum sure we're better people than that. We can treat our streams, our surface waters better than that, and we can restore the ones we've screwed up. That said, there are still a bunch of absolutely pristine streams in Kansas. And believe it or not, it's probably no surprise to people here. Those landowners who own the lands that are dissected by these pristine, crystal clear, historically healthy streams want to protect them. And so we're working with landowners who want to protect those streams using conservation easements, using best management practices. It's really exciting to see streams like that protected in concert with the wishes of private landowners for the long haul. So Matt, I think I'm out of time, so I'll shut up. Thank you so much for letting me join this.
Appreciate that and appreciate your time this afternoon, Rob. With that, and I know we did get one additional question in a chat. So Rob, we might do sort of what we did before. And if you're open to maybe fielding this question offline, we can pass the question along to you and we can respond to that individual following the conference today. We could do that if you're suitable to that.
Sure.
Okay, we'll plan on doing that. So again, appreciate your time, Rob, this afternoon. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Director Owen for some final words here in our featured speaker session before we transition to our break for the rest of the afternoon.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. And thank you so much, Rob. And I want to recognize again our speakers that we've already heard from today. I don't know about you, but I'm super motivated and I find a lot of hope in some of the messages that we're getting. And it seems like a really energized time for water. And that should be good news for all of us. There are certainly reasons that we need to be concerned about the issues, and some of the news is not always as hopeful or as good, but I'm glad to see the level of energy and engagement on taking on those issues. So thank you very much to Rob and to Doug and to Chairman Highland and to Representative Vaughn for speaking with us so far today. We will now be on a break, a short break. We will resume again at 3:50. So please enjoy whatever slideshows we may have for you in the meantime, but we'll join you back up at 3:30. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice break. And now we'll move into our afternoon portion of the conference, where we will hear from representatives of our state agencies, not necessarily in the order that you see on your screen. We will start off with Secretary Brad Loveless with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. Brad?
Thank you, Connie. Get my screen up here shared. I don't want you to see that. I want you to see this. There it is. Okay. All right, can you see that okay?
I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So our recreation, when it comes to water for our agency, Wildlife and Parks, recreation and the economy are huge issues, as are species impact. So that's what I wanted to focus on with the few minutes I have to visit with you today. The economic impact of recreation is enormous. And we just received, just this week, as a matter of fact, we're getting ready to release a study that Wichita State Center for Economic Development and Business Research completed for us. They polled over 39,000 visitors for Kansas state parks. And on average, our parks see 6.8 million visitor days per year, right? So a huge amount of interest in our parks. And that's never been more evident than it has been the last couple of years with COVID. But this is a trend we've been seeing as an increasing trend for years. These state parks, because of the visitors, support over 5,000 jobs annually, $130 million in wages, and almost $300 million in related sales. Interestingly, part of the survey that we were really focused on was how satisfied are people. And over 90% said they'd recommend the state parks to others, and over 80% said they intended personally to return to that same park within the year. So a high degree of satisfaction. And then, of course, we're back to our previous presentations. It's largely about money and how do you fund these things. Over 2/3 of our visitors said they would pay a higher fee if they knew that that money would be invested in our parks. So there's a high degree of ownership and satisfaction with these parks. Couple slides just to show you a couple of the events that we have at our parks. This is Milford. We have fishing tournaments across the state, basically every weekend of the spring, summer, and fall. This is a big one at Milford, but we have them all across Kansas. They bring a lot of visitors and a lot of interest to Kansas. These are some kayakers on the Kansas River. Again, a lot of interest, and people are realizing what a valuable resource, what beautiful opportunities they have in Kansas, and they're using those more and more. So importantly, this is an important economic driver, particularly to those rural areas. The second thing I want to talk about today is part of our mission as Department of Wildlife and Parks is to look out for the species that are in Kansas. And when we have some lists of species that we consider in need of special care, two basic lists. One is our Kansas threatened and endangered species list. We have 51 species on that. The Kansas species in need of conservation, a lesser need than the threatened and endangered list. We have 82 on that. So of those 133 species that are on that list, almost 3/4 of them depend on the water we have here in Kansas. So it really becomes critical for us to take care of the water resource and to do better over time. And this, Rob just made a comment about our streams and their ability to support all the designated uses. That's a challenge for us here in Kansas, and one that we need to continue to work on. If we step away from Kansas and talk about a global perspective, the graph to the right is pretty scary. You see declines since 1970. That's kind of the baseline here. Since 1970, you see declines in all these categories: terrestrial species, marine species, all vertebrate species. But look at the lowest line there, the one that's experienced about 50% decline in biodiversity, freshwater species dependent on the resource that we're talking about today. And this is true in Kansas also. When we look at the greatest declines, as the previous slide showed, they're around our freshwater resources here in Kansas. Key reasons for this loss: land use change is always near the top, habitat changes, climate change is affecting that to some degree, invasive species, I'll talk about those here in a second. Overexploitation, sometimes there's too many taken, there's too many used, and they can't sustain that. But when you see a decline by 50% in diversity in only about 50 years, that should cause us to be alarmed. Okay, this slide, we want to talk about the aquatic nuisance species issue. And this lists a few of those that we're focused on in our agency. First is quagga mussels. A lot of you have never heard of these. You've all heard about zebra mussels. Quagga mussels make zebras look like wimps. Quagga mussels are able to take over all parts of a pond or a reservoir. Zebra mussels rely on a hard substrate to attach to. Quaggas don't. They will outcompete zebras. They're really scary. They're coming from the Great Lakes. So we're really worried about them. There's some in the southwestern part of the United States, none in Kansas yet, and we have plans to keep them out. A second category of problems when it comes to aquatic nuisance species are things used in trade. It was mentioned to me, a grade school teacher was wanting some crayfish to use in a class project. They sent away for them. They were a species that was invasive to Kansas. There's no protocols for them shipping them over state lines to places where they shouldn't be. So there's challenges out there. Mossball is one of the examples we were talking about a year ago when we found out these things were being sold in the aquarium trade. for cleaning up aquariums, and they oftentimes had zebra mussels in them unintentionally, but they were in there. So a big potential problem. Invasive crayfish are a challenge. We've got a few different species that we're watching out for and we're worried about. Marbled crayfish at the bottom is especially scary because it's asexual. You don't need to have two different sexes in order to produce a population. So really scary. Black carp, you've heard about the Asian carp. These are problematic in our river systems, the Kansas River, the Neosho River. We have some barriers in place, some dams. We're trying to enhance those dams' ability to keep those carp downstream and not let them get upstream from there. So we're working on that. One of the problems with black carp is that the native mussels that are really in decline, that we're really working hard to protect and to help their populations expand, black carp focus on those native mussels. So that's another problem. Snakeheads are a really scary fish that we're worried about moving from the southeast up our way. That they will supplant a lot of our Kansas fishes if they get in. So we're working hard to keep them out. The last thing I'll mention, everybody's been talking, Representative Highland and Rob from Nature Conservancy talk about funding. Currently, you need to be aware that all of the protections against all these zebra mussels and everything else we've got are all funded by fish angler dollars, right? That money all is coming from this one narrow group, even though obviously we all are drinking water and our manufacturers are using that water for industrial needs. Yet all the funding for these aquatic nuisance species protective measures are coming just from the anglers in Kansas. So that's problematic, and we need to solve that. We appreciate the water authority's work to put some money in the budget. Last year it was taken out of our budget. This year we're hoping to keep it in and get some help more broadly from all Kansans for this need that affects all Kansans. So now let's talk about, my last slide just shows this is how they get in. The two modes of protection we will use, and we started this in small part, we need to expand it, is for those reservoirs, the 9 reservoirs that don't have zebra mussels yet, put check stations there. They are watercraft inspection and decontamination sites. These are portable, easy to set up and use, needs people to run it, but as boats are coming in and leaving, you just make sure they're clean after you inspect them. And that really reduces the risk to a tremendous degree. The other thing is though, vehicles traveling down the highways before they ever get to a reservoir, inspection stations are used effectively by other states on the major highways. And currently the budgets we're requesting would include those kind of check stations. And so we're very hopeful to get resources to do those key, not complicated, but very simple, but very effective steps to keep these species out and not let them spread any further in Kansas. Still on the subject of species impact, let's talk about the streams we're trying to protect in Kansas. This is the Ark River in the southwest, and this is the Plains minnow, a species that's really dependent on rivers in that part of the state, especially. And more on the Plains minnow here in a minute. This is Shoal Creek in far southeast Kansas. And one of the species that depends on that is this kind of exotic looking hogsucker. Really a neat fish, but only found in a small portion of Kansas streams. This is a verdigris river, one of our richest rivers in terms of freshwater mussels. This is also in southeast Kansas. This is a small sampling of mussels taken from just a 1 meter by 1 meter square in the bottom of that stream. So incredibly high densities in this gorgeous stream, but it's going to take protections to look out for these. Importantly, our freshwater mussels have this really unique symbiotic relationship with species of fish. Here's the 3 species of bass in Kansas: largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted. And mussels have a complex, a lot of these a complex life cycle that requires them to attract the fish, to come in close. When they get close enough, they eject their larval mussels that are too small to live on their own into those fish. They attach to the fish's gills for a period of weeks. And that allows them to grow up to where they can be self-sufficient. They drop off the fish, no harm done, fall into the substrate and complete their life cycle. So fish are critical. You remove the fish and the mussels won't survive. So high water quality is very important. And these complex relationships that occur in these streams are critical to all of us. I wanted to mention a survey. This fits into the data that Rob showed as part of conservation funding. Look at these high numbers. This is in Kansas. 94% support continuing to identify and protect habitat for threatened endangered species, sensitive species in Kansas. That's an incredibly high number. 84% support protection of the species that are listed. Even if they're abundant elsewhere, even if you go a couple states away, a species is common, Kansas is on the edge of the range. Should we protect them here? Most people in Kansas say, yes, you still should. And then almost 90% support penalties for those who harm endangered wildlife. So protections for these critters. That's a very solid endorsement of protections for these sensitive species. This is a picture out in Ness County, Oak Creek. You can hardly tell there's a stream there. There's so much vegetation overhanging and tumbleweeds have blown in, but this is habitat for a really special species, the Ark River darter in Kansas. It occurs in these selective areas. It really relies on these tiny tributary streams, largely that are dried up for significant parts of the year. But in the spring, when spawning occurs, they run up these areas. There's not many predators there. There's a lot of cover to protect them. They depend on those ephemeral streams, those ones that aren't flowing all the time. So clearly, the species that we're required to protect are dependent on these stream resources. This is a picture that we stole from Department of Ag that shows, if you look at the legend down below, the streams to the right are the ones that are continuing to flow that are perennial now. The ones to the left, the red dots, are places that have dried up since the 1960s. So these are significant changes, and species like that Ark darter that I mentioned depend on these streams. And so as we lose those streams, we lose species. So there's broad effects on wildlife when our streams change that way. That plains minnow I showed you earlier, this is a distribution map of those over the decades. And the round circles show all the places where they occurred out years ago, up to over 100 years ago. And then a survey done from 51 to 90, those black dots show you where they occurred then, but then look at this shaded portion where they occur now in our most recent surveys in just the last 30 years, right? So you see a shrinking of this, and that's because these streams aren't running the same way as they used to. They don't have dependable water there. So we're losing species. Certainly we're constricting their range because of these changes in the way our streams work. So this is concerning, but despite this, and this is how I'll finish, there is some real hope. These are some mussels. I mentioned those that depend on the fish to be a host while they're very young. This is a species called fat muckets, has a funny name. They're very uncommon, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can reintroduce these to areas where they used to occur, but for reasons oftentimes because of pollution that may have occurred in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that doesn't occur anymore in some of our streams. We think we can reintroduce these effectively, but how do you get the critters? We can't just steal adults and throw them in, but if we can produce these young, which is what you see here, then there is hope. This is done at a center we're very proud of. We partnered with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment on the Kansas Aquatic Biodiversity Center down in Farlington, Kansas. That's where we were able to raise those mussels. And there's a whole bunch of neat things going on there. But the idea is if we can raise critters that are in short supply, grow those here, take them out to the places that still have conditions where they could live, even though they might have been eliminated in past years. If all the conditions are good now, we can go and very quickly help them recolonize Kansas. Now, one of the complications to that is that when you do that and you're dealing with sensitive, particularly threatened and endangered species, there are risks associated with that. So we're just finishing up what you see here, the Kansas Aquatic Species Conservation Agreement. It's called a Safe Harbors Agreement. And it says, if you say, I used to have plains minnow on my ground, they aren't there anymore, I'm interested in helping them repopulate this area. We have an agreement with you and Fish and Wildlife Service to protect you. If you have them on your ground and your cattle end up moving through the creek and stomping on some of these, that's okay. All the normal farming and ranching practices are allowed and help keep the landowner safe. So we're very excited about completing this. This is going to open the door for us to very confidently move these out to landowners who want to host them, and very quickly, we hope, help them repopulate our streams the way they once were. Another key component of this gets back to money, what we talked about early. There's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act is moving through the federal legislature right now. We've had great support from our Kansas senators. And with this, it'll supply money for sensitive wildlife. It's not focused on game species near as much as it is on these non-game species that we're talking about that are in short supply and having trouble. So you combine regulatory allowances with money to fund these programs, and we're very optimistic that we're going to make progress on this and progress very soon. And this is a video that I hope will run. I'm clicking, see if it'll run. If it would, okay. These are those plains minnows. We've got a few adults. We brought them into the lab at the KABC, and we had a great hatch. And so we're very excited. All we got to do now, we complete the paperwork. We talk with landowners, and we're anxious to get these out in Kansas streams where they can do good again. So with that, I will end my presentation. And I don't know how much time I used, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you all.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Brad, for giving us the update from Wildlife and Parks. And I kind of failed to mention at the outset of this portion that there won't be time for Q&A in the middle of the presentations, but there will be some time later in the social time, depending on the room, the breakout room that you get into. And Brad, if you don't have time to stick around for that, would you be willing to answer some questions later on that have shown up in chat that we could do some follow-up later?
I absolutely would, and I'll try to stay on, even though I've got to move a little bit. I'll try to stay connected with you and hope there's questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay,
Thanks, Connie.
next I will hand the program over to Earl Lewis, who's the Chief Engineer of the Division of Water Resources within the Department of Agriculture. Chief Engineer, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Connie, and appreciate the opportunity to be on and give you an update here. I don't have any slides to share with you, but I might spend a little bit of time sharing what's been going on at the Department of Agriculture. I'm pleased to be able to talk on behalf of the entire department. I want to thank Secretary Beam and also Andy Lyon as the Director of Division of Conservation, our leadership team when it comes to water issues and really providing good support and background here. So I'll start first with Division of Water Resources and what's been going on. And much like has been echoed in a number of the other presentations today, a lot of what we do is dependent upon a lot of our partners out across the state and a lot of individuals. We certainly spend a lot of our time in our water appropriation program talking about what's going on in the Little Aquifer and water conservation, and certainly you've heard some of that already today. I would like to highlight a couple things. First, we recognize and appreciate all the work that's being done in our groundwater management districts, particularly as it relates to local enhanced management areas. This year, we added our third LEMA back in February with Wichita County, which is in GMB1 in West Central Kansas. Now, that LEMA is a 5-year LEMA that covers the current year through 2025. And so we'll see how that one progresses. GMB1 is also working. In fact, they had a board meeting this morning where they were working on expanding or covering the other remaining 4 counties in GMB1 with a LEMA that would hopefully go into effect in 2023. So the effort is growing out there, and certainly led by our GMD4 in Northwest Kansas. We've talked extensively in the past about Sheridan 6, and rightfully so, is the first LEMA in the state of Kansas. Next year will be its 10th year of being in operation. They have renewed once. They are, again, 5-year period LEMAs. And again, if you haven't heard the story before, Sheridan 6 LEMA has been attempting to achieve a 20% reduction, and the users there have been beating that pretty consistently. The first 5-year period, they beat that almost double, more than 35% savings of water versus the previous period. So they're really seeing some good results. And again, getting back to the money side of this, work done by Dr. Bill Golden at Kansas State, showing that those producers are seeing as much, if not more, return on their investment or profitability when in the LEMA than they did outside. Being able to use alternative crops, being able to use irrigation technology, they've really adapted and are really seeing good gains and good water conservation at the same time. 4 years ago, they, much like GMD1 is talking about now, they expanded beyond the Sheridan 6 LEMA and went to almost a district-wide LEMA in GMD4. That again is running through next year. GMD4 has already submitted a request to renew Sheridan 6 LEMA for the next period, starting in 2023, and are working on a request to renew the district-wide LEMA as well. These are all under the auspices of the LEMA Act and under the management programs, the groundwater management districts. And the management programs help to guide the individual management and issues that the GMDs take on. This year, we were able to work with GMD4 and have adopted an update to their management program, which will be going to hearing here soon, and are working with GMD3 to get their management program updated and are nearly done with that, hopefully by the end of the year. So those are both good partnerships that we're able to move along this year, and hopefully we'll be able to bring those to an end in the near future. Rattlesnake Creek's already been mentioned a couple times today, and I think Rob mentioned that we didn't want to offend any of the attorneys. We were actually, along with Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, were sued by the Audubon Society of Kansas in January of this year regarding implementation of water right administration, or the MOU between U.S. Fish and Wildlife and GMD over the Rattlesnake Creek. That lawsuit has recently been dismissed based on, in our case, grounds of the lawsuit being filed in federal court and the statute we operate being under the state law rather than federal court or federal law. So the judge dismissed that lawsuit here recently. There is work being done by the local groundwater management district in cooperation with NRCS and a consulting firm, Olson, looking at augmentation of the stream and other opportunities to try and bring the situation more into balance so that so we don't have to get into such a significant water right administration. I do want to highlight the fact that while the lawsuit was dismissed, the underlying issue still remains. We still have an impairment of a senior water right in Rattlesnake Creek that needs to be addressed. And we're glad that the GMB is taking that seriously and looking at augmentation. We're looking forward to the results of that study and whether or not that resolves the entire issue or whether there's other things that have to be done in cooperation with that. I also want to highlight, I know that Rob talked about their work with a number of farmers in the area, and certainly like we've seen in Sheridan 6 and the LEMAs in Western Kansas, we want to highlight the work that's done there to try and to show, prove, and then educate folks that maybe don't need as much water on a continuing basis as we thought to still be successful. A couple of the other issues that we talk about quite a bit that maybe folks are interested in, changes to the Wichita aquifer storage and recovery permits are still going on. Their hearing is still underway. We're expecting a report from the hearing officer near the end of this year. Then we'll look at the proposed recommendations from the hearing officer and make a ruling sometime early next year on what we think is the right answer on those permit conditions going forward. Likewise, we continue to wait for the district court judge to rule on the Hayes R9 change applications, assuming that the judge rules that the changes that had been proposed to be approved by Dave Barfield when he was the chief engineer here are correct, then we will proceed into the transfer hearing process, which could last from 8 to 20 months, depending on how that process proceeds. So again, that could happen at any time. We're certainly ready to move forward once we get a positive ruling from the district court. We don't talk much about our water structure side, but certainly dam safety has been an issue. In fact, yesterday was at the legislature in front of House Ag and Natural Resources and Senate Ag and Natural Resources Joint Committee to talk about dam safety, about the fact that we have lost funding and our ability to keep up with the issue over the years. This last year, that became pretty evident to us as we had a privately owned dam just east of Hoyt that was in the process of failing, and we needed to act on it. Didn't really have the tools that we needed, and luckily we were able to access emergency funds to get that breached before it failed on its own and caused damage downstream. But it does show that we have a number of issues with our dam safety program, with our structures that need some attention, and we're going to be bringing some recommended changes to the legislature this next year to hopefully help improve our program there and again put us in a better position to address the dams that are out there and keep the public safe. Floodplain mapping is certainly something that we continue to work on. One of the things that has held us up over the last few years is we use LiDAR mapping to do a lot of that work, and the state has a contract to get the state flowed, get that information into the format we need it in. We've had significant delays going on 2 years now, but all of the data has now been delivered to the state of Kansas. It's going through the quality assurance review by USGS, and we hopefully in the next few months we'll be able to bring more of that data online. And I know many of you out there use that data for any number of purposes, and we end up helping to monitor and manage that contract and bring that home, and we're getting close. Interstate water issues is actually one where we are we're in better shape than we've been in a long time. We're not in active litigation with any of our neighboring states. We hope that we keep it that way. We continue to work with our counterparts in Nebraska and Colorado on the Republican River, on the Ark River. Doesn't mean we don't have some issues we need to resolve, and we continue to work in a negotiated framework to resolve those issues. But I'm happy to say that we are not in a confrontation situation right now. Shifting over to Division of Conservation, and again, information from Andy Lyon and his leadership there, continuing to work with the watershed districts to get ourselves ready. I think we hear often, and a lot of people are wondering what kind of funding there is at the federal level, especially with the infrastructure bill that's recently passed, and maybe under the Build Back Better bill that could be passed in the near future. What does that mean for Kansas? And what does that mean for our dams that I just talked about maybe needing some help? So DOC is working with a number of the watershed districts to see how we get those, get that information in a situation we can act on it quickly if and when there is funding available through NRCS or through the federal programs in order to deal with some of our dams that may need some attention. Again, going back out to South Central Kansas, this year the Upper Ark CREP program was expanded to include the Rattlesnake Creek, and so that's another opportunity for us to leverage some federal funds to take some of that irrigated property, reduce our demand on the aquifer, demand on the stream, and again, hopefully bring back things into balance a little bit better. And so we're excited to see what kind of sign up we get in the Rattlesnake Creek to again balance things out there. Our water transition assistance program being used in Greeley and Wichita counties, again trying to target areas of high decline and sensitive areas, and match that with some funds to slow the decline of the aquifer there. Irrigation technology is something we've talked about a number of times in the past, and there was additional funding that provided this year. and is going out again towards the High Plains Aquifer area to really make sure that we are managing our water well on the individual field level, and again, trying to make sure those producers are profitable when we do that. In the east, we still continue to focus on stream bank stabilization, trying to make sure we're hitting the high priority areas. And this year, add additional contractors to our list of folks that we work with. When it comes to stream bank stabilization, again, trying to get more people on the ground so that we can get more of the stream bank stabilization projects done in a timely manner and move that project forward. DOC continues to work with other partners on the Playa Lakes joint venture, especially it pertains to municipal wells, and again, out in west central Kansas, to try and bring federal, state, and local partner dollars together to identify Playa Lakes that can be protected and hopefully benefit not only the water supply, but the habitat and the general area there. And then the last thing we want to hit on is that this last year there were on-farm field trials in each of the counties, really led by the local conservation districts. DOC has worked with conservation districts, but each of those conservation districts really try and identify the practices they want to highlight, they want to try out in their county, and then again, try and have an opportunity to educate producers in the area to show what can work and how will work to benefit them and to benefit its natural resources. And so we're really proud again of our partners and individual producers out there across the state that are working with us and working to try and make sure we have good water resources across our state. So with that, Connie, I'm happy to turn it back over to you and we'll answer questions when we get a chance.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much, Earl. And next up, we have Secretary Lee Norman, Secretary of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And Dr. Norman, that's to you.
Thank you very much, Connie. Hello, everybody. I heard Brad Loveless's presentation, and I'm realizing I must have done something wrong in life. He gets fish and photography and fresh water, and I get COVID-19. So that being said, I'm really pleased to be working in KDHE on the environment side as well. The importance of water, and especially water quality of the state, has become very apparent to me during my time as secretary. I've known that, of course, forever from a public health perspective. A few things I want to walk through from our bureaus and some of the projects and the things that are on our front burner. The uraniums, nitrates, and chlorides in groundwater require a high cost of treatment, and cost of treatment facilities is quite high, as you know, and yet important and necessary for meeting drinking water standards. The nitrates, phosphorus, and bacteria in the surface water that cause harmful algal blooms in our lakes and reservoirs, that in turn affects our citizens, our health, and our economy for those recreational areas. And as you can well imagine, water quality is important. We talk a lot about water quantity. I think a lot of people take water quality for granted, but all the water in the world doesn't do you any good if it cannot be used for the purpose that you have in mind. In many cases, it doesn't matter how much quantity you have if the water does not work for the purposes. We take that very seriously. KDHE is working with the new Biden administration on its priorities and its initiatives. Just to name a few areas, we are seeing significant interest from the EPA. A little early to know where some of this will head, but one is climate change, global warming, and greenhouse gas regulations. Recognizing that these are controversial, the Biden administration has taken a different tack than the prior administration. And these things include everything from regulating greenhouse gases to electrification of vehicles, something our agency has been a part of, to cover crops and carbon credits as well. Another one is a topic in the Biden administration priorities is environmental justice. The EPA is working on definitions of vulnerable populations of persons to ensure that environmental programs account for those people as well. We, on the health side, of course, have long learned about the social determinants of health, and we're seeing the same principles applied to the environment as well. Some people live in less clean and less livable areas compared to others. We support, as an agency, the concept behind environmental justice, and will work to identify those vulnerable communities. One of the outcomes from this COVID pandemic is that we know a lot more about how, from a social vulnerability perspective, where populations live that are more vulnerable. I'd like to apply some of those same principles to environmental vulnerability as well. Infrastructure funding, as was mentioned earlier by Earl, will be for drinking water and wastewater treatment, monies available as well. I know there's a lot of interest in this, as many of the communities need to update their facilities and their systems. As mentioned earlier, that these are expensive treatment systems, and many of our communities need some help with that. Briefly, from the Bureau of Water within my agency, the infrastructure bill passed a couple of weeks ago has implications for water and wastewater treatment. We're still waiting for guidance from the EPA. Don't have the final word on that as to how these new funds will be used, but we know that there's a couple areas that will emerge and being promoted in legislation. One is to eliminate lead from drinking water. This is not a new problem, and you've heard about it from other parts of the country, especially for children. And that is one of the areas we need to do a broader investigation throughout the state. Second, need to dive into the emerging contaminants, and you've heard about PFASs, the perfluorinated chemicals, and to invest in investigating, locating where those sources of are, and then both in rural and urban areas to figure ways to remediate. We don't know the extent in many areas of the lead and perfluorinated chemicals problem, and that will be one of the very top agency priorities over the next 1 to 3 years, is uncovering those facts statewide. Where are we strong? Where are we weak? We do know that rural Kansas towns have a disproportionate number of non-compliance issues under the Clean Water Act and the Safe Water Drinking Act. These same towns are plagued by declining populations and eroding revenues that thwart their ability to invest in technologies that are necessary to bring them into compliance. The infrastructure legislation will provide, or should provide, relief to some of those communities with potential for 50 to 100% subsidies in treatment, collection, and distribution system financing. So that's a glimmer of hope on the horizon that hopefully will come to fruition. KDHE is hoping the EPA does not make the rules of engagement for these new funds so onerous that it creates a disincentive to invest in these projects. That remains to be seen. Again, talking about the flexibility that we will have as a state in terms of where those investments are going or will go. We are confident that prudent distribution of these federal funding sources will improve the scorecard for our Kansas water and wastewater. From the Bureau of Environmental Field Services, we continue to study and work with non-point source pollution reduction efforts in leveraging the EPA funds to bring a particularly promising program and to expand on the Farmer to Farmer program in Kansas, where farmers experienced in soil health provide coaching and mentoring of other farmers in their communities. Additionally, we obtained, as an agency, funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to aid farmers in navigating farm bill programs to implement soil health improvements. We also piloted a program in the Cheney Lake watershed to assist with developing verifiable, and verifiable is important, water quality credits that cities and farmers can use to potentially trade for water quality improvements. Something near and dear to me is KHEL, the Kansas Health and Environment Lab, the lab that services, of course, both our environmental testing and our public health as well. Our legislature last session provided a proviso in the budget that should allow for a new KDHE laboratory in Topeka to be built. I don't know if you've ever been to the KHEL laboratory, currently out at Forbes. Our current facility is a 1950s military hospital. And the building is at the end, it's not at the end of its life, it's beyond the end of its life, and is not conducive to the functioning of a modern laboratory or a pleasant, safe environment to recruit people into. We are very, very excited about the prospect of a new lab. We still have a few minor hurdles, but we're optimistic, and that hasn't been said for a long time about a new lab. We have made a decision to purchase the equipment necessary to analyze for the new, for the perfluorinated chemical group that I mentioned earlier. Investment is about $400,000 for that new equipment. We know we need this analytical instrument for those chemicals as we determine the extent and their presence in the environment. Those, you'll recall, are the very long-acting and long-lived chemicals in the environment, potentially. The Kansas Health and Environment Lab is also the state's public health lab, as I mentioned, performing clinical testing to support the health and well-being of Kansans. The clinical area performed 300,000 COVID tests in the last 18 months. That's a portion. We have a lot of contract labs all over the state, of course, but we had a very busy COVID-19 testing program, and we still do, of course. Finally, briefly, I guess, the Bureau of Environmental Remediation. The reauthorization of the Environmental Remediation Tanks Program has been approved, published and codified in the Environmental Protection by the EPA. The KDHE Underground Storage Tank Program was published in the Federal Registry, and EPA took direct and final action this November 1 of this year. Kansas initially received state program approval in 1994 after the development of the Kansas Storage Tank Act. The authorization of the tank program enables Kansas storage tank staff to work directly with regulated communities in the state. Kansas was the first state in the U.S. EPA Region 7 to achieve this reauthorization. Last couple comments. Bureau of Air. The request for a proposal has been issued by the Kansas Department of Transportation, KDOT, for vehicle electrification stations across the state of Kansas. Priority locations have been assigned along I-70 and the Kansas Turnpike. KDOT is utilizing $2 million portion of the Kansas Settlement Act with Volkswagen that you may have heard about in the past, which is administered through the Bureau of Air to fund this project. And finally, last but not least, the Bureau of Waste Management. The Bureau of Waste Management released the 2021 to 25 statewide solid waste management plan. After soliciting feedback from stakeholders through the survey, we have come up with and adopted 36 program goals. In January of 2022, the Bureau of Waste Management will provide its first annual progress report toward meeting those goals using both measured metrics and a narrative description of the activities. Both the plan and the progress report can be found on the Bureau of Waste Management website. I think in concluding, what I'd like to say is I've really, as a secretary, as you know, I'm a physician by training and background. I think of myself as a pretty good scientist. And the delving into quality of water and air and the environment side has been a real a challenge, but a treat for me as a secretary of this agency. And I've worked with many of you and Earl and Brad and others in Mike Beam and sister agencies. And it has been a real treat for me seeing the excellent work that's being done and coming together, I think, in a very cohesive approach to clean water. So thank you very much. I will unfortunately need to drop off promptly at 4:30. I'll stay on till then, but thank you very much for inviting me to have a chance to speak, and I'll turn it back to you, Connie.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary Norman. And we will next hear from Deputy Secretary Paul Hughes with the Kansas Department of Commerce. Deputy Secretary Hughes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Hughes, Deputy Secretary for Business Development at the Kansas Department of Commerce. And some of you may know that I've recently taken this role, having moved here from Arizona, where I lived for 20 years and watched as a state struggled as one of 7 states scrumming over the same river water. And my message here today is really that we're doing some incredible work here in Kansas, and it's important that we all work together on this, not only from an agricultural aspect or even a quality of life aspect. Both of those are very important, but also from a commercial aspect. Our economic development professionals know businesses are looking to locate or expand here in Kansas, and it's based on many factors, including water. And that's increasingly becoming part of the conversation as we see more advanced manufacturing coming to the state. we've been on an incredible trend here in Kansas, and we look to be rounding out this year at over $3 billion of investment in the state. And water is an important element to that. Businesses of all sizes, it's what they need in order to thrive here. And so these strengths that we have in our partnerships have empowered us to get to these goals. And we intend to remain aggressive in our recruitment of companies to the state. And what I've heard as a recurring theme here today was a number of issues that were being surfaced. And what I wanted to highlight today was a program that operates out of the Kansas Department of Commerce. It's a funding grant program that we want to call attention to as a funding source for many of the communities that are looking for support on a lot of their efforts. And it's the Community Development Block Grant Water and Sewer Program. I've dropped a link to that program in the chat space. And although we've just wrapped up acceptance of our 2021 applications, we will soon be beginning the workshops that will highlight the 2022 grant cycle. So I encourage you to, if it's not you, please delegate that to somebody within your organization who can help with the research on that program. But the program itself, you'll hear the acronym because we're big on those here, CDBG, or the Community Development Block Grants, provide funding to low and moderate income communities to help in upgrade their aging and damaged water and wastewater systems. Lee was just mentioning lead abatement on many of those. And it's not a glamorous aspect for some of these communities, but it's an important element to making sure that whether it's water tower maintenance or all the dollars that are helping reduce water loss within these communities is part of the conservation effort that was also mentioned earlier today. So there are examples of where that program has delivered success for the state of Kansas, including in Downs, where nitrates pose a threat to the water supply, and the Community Development Block Grant funds recently helped replace the outdated treatment equipment in order to make the water safer. There was also a project in Strong City providing the critical infrastructure improvements to, again, a deteriorating wastewater system prone to breaks and leakage and waste of a precious resource here in the state. But also in Mullinville, a CDBG grant funding to update their water distribution system and improve the quality of drinking water for their residents there. So again, these are just a few examples of in the past few years where we've put nearly $25 billion to work in water and sewer grants to communities across the state. And we encourage officials in every eligible Kansas community in need of assistance with water or sewer systems to look at applying for these CDBG funds next year. The workshops will be taking place in spring of 22 with applications accepted in the fall of 2022. And I'd just like to touch on a few of those that are responsible and the visionaries that are responsible for making this program a success. Last year, Governor Kelly announced an impressive expansion in Salina by Schwann's. It was a day to celebrate new jobs and significant capital investment. And it's also a time to spotlight another success story. Schwann's new facility was designed to help the company reduce its wastewater output by 10,000 gallons a day. That's a tremendous win for Schwann's and for Salina and for our state. A similar success story unfolded a few years ago with the new Dairy Farmers of America plant in Garden City. In a region where depletion of the aquifer was hitting home, the DFA plant was built so that all of the water used there is recycled and repurposed by the city as a source of non-potable water, truly a modern approach for others to follow. And these companies aren't alone. Kansas also is home to several companies specialized in water-regulated technologies that encourage water conservation and recycling for municipalities and industries. Black & Veatch in Overland Park is a global leader in water infrastructure design, delivery systems that protect the environment and conserve precious water supply. Another company, Mio Microbotics in Lenexa, is a global manufacturer of integrated water solutions. And we know many other businesses of all sizes in all parts of our state deserve praise for encouraging responsible water management use. Investing in our precious water supply is good business. There's no doubt public and private investments in water supply and sanitation improvements pay off, which is why we will continue to do all we can to support and encourage actions that ensure safe and adequate water supplies. Thank you again for allowing me to participate in this important discussion today, and for everyone's thoughtful contributions and future collaboration on the water vision in Kansas specific ways to conserve and sustain our most precious resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary Hughes. Very pleased to have you on the panel and to find out about all these promising endeavors taking place. And our final agency update will come from Matt Unruh, who I'm very pleased to announce became the Assistant Director of the Kansas Water Office this year. So Matt, we'll let you finish off this part of the program.
Thank you, Director Owen, and thank you everyone today for your interest in Kansas Water Resources and your participation in today and tomorrow's Governor's Conference on the Future of Water in Kansas. The turnout has been fantastic from what I've been able to keep tabs on online, so definitely appreciate everyone's interest in our program today. So I'll let everyone know I do take very seriously my obligation internally to keep us on schedule as best as I can at this point. So I'm going to be very brief with my comments when it comes to water office related update, but I would just mention real briefly for everyone, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone afterwards for any additional information that people might be interested in regarding activities of the water office. But as some of you might or might not know, the water office has experienced a year of transition in 2021. And we have several new faces. If you haven't had a chance to meet or greet these individuals, starting off with our new director of the water office, Connie Owen, who is our MC for today's program. As well as from a water authority standpoint, Don Bueller was appointed as the new chair of the Kansas Water Authority. So I definitely would encourage everyone on today's program, if you haven't had a chance to meet or greet either Don or Connie, to let myself know or others, and we can help make those connections present for those conversations to take place. I know from both Connie and Don's standpoint, they're interested in engaging with anyone on any topic when it comes to water resource issues of the state. So definitely feel free to touch base if we can help facilitate at least some element of meet and greet with those two individuals. I would also like to thank those agencies on today's panel, as well as the other numerous local, state, and federal partners for your continued support and coordination that we all have been a part of regarding efforts to benefit the water resources of the state. So all of the panelists today have mentioned a number of programs, initiatives that their respective agencies are a part of, and there's a great deal of coordination and collaboration that takes place regarding each and every one of those programs, as well as others that are taking place at both the state, local, and federal level, as well as nonprofit related agencies. So I appreciate the efforts that all of you are putting to make the resources of our state better now and into the future. In relation to activities of the water office, as you all know, one of our big primary statutory obligations is development of the Kansas Water Plan and coordination of implementation of the water plan. And here recently, we have just completed the formal public comment phase of the Kansas Water Plan update. Last month, we had our public hearings in association with that update process, and we're in the process of reviewing those comments internally that we received from the hearings, as well as during that open comment period. So we appreciate everyone's comments that were provided during that open comment period. We received a lot of great feedback, and there's a lot of thought that we'll need to put into reviewing those comments to ultimately bring forward a water plan that helps guide the direction of water resources of the state now and into the future. So appreciate everyone's efforts providing us fantastic feedback on the water plan update that's taking place currently. In addition to that, and more from a water authority standpoint, we are in sort of the middle of the budget process when it comes to determination of what ultimately becomes would be the State Water Plan Fund FY 2023 budget. And the Water Authority earlier this summer took action on their budget recommendations that are feeding into the budget recommendation development process currently from both an agency and state legislative level on up the chain. And as has been the case from the Water Authority for the past several years, their primary recommendation when it comes to the State Water Plan Fund is full restoration of that $8 million SGF EDIF demand transfer. So efforts continue to proceed forward regarding restoration of that enhancement request there from the Water Authority when it comes to full restoration of the SGF EDIF demand transfer. I also might mention just real briefly, continuation of efforts when it comes to reservoir sedimentation. There's been a great deal of progress that's been made on the planning coordination front when it comes to the Tuttle Creek WID pilot project or water injection dredging. So that's something that we will hear about tomorrow in one of our presentations. So definitely encourage everyone to take note of the presentation that Josh Olson will be giving of our office regarding the Tuttle Creek WID efforts. Also would just want to highlight the continuation of priority efforts from a water office standpoint when it comes to groundwater conservation efforts. So Earl and others have mentioned a number of the efforts that are taking place across the state really when it comes to water conservation efforts. And we know that one of the programs that the water office utilizes to promote those conservation efforts would be our water technology program or water technology farm program. So we continue to work with producers across the state as well as with a number of partners to set in place demonstration farms to highlight tools and technologies that can be utilized to improve irrigation water use that ultimately leads to water conservation, as well as opportunities to improve overall per acre profitability when it comes to the water conservation benefits that are realized from utilization of these tools and technologies. So those are efforts that continue to take place from a water office standpoint and will continue on into the future as well. And then just real briefly in closing here, I would want to mention that for those of you that have had any sort of dealings with the water office, you know that we are a small agency and many of you get to deal with all of our staff on any number of issues. And we had the privilege of being able to bring on 3 new staffers this year: Amelia Nill, Sarah Clark, and Lauren Campbell. So if you haven't had a chance to meet any of our new employees yet, I encourage you to take advantage of the social time later here in a few minutes, or when you get a chance to meet them in person on down the road. Definitely encourage you to say hi to them and introduce yourself. So with that, I would again like to thank everyone for their participation in today's conference, and I will turn it back over to Director Owen for the next portion of our program today.
Okay, great. And Matt, well done in keeping us on schedule. I've masterfully done. I want to thank the panel members that participated this afternoon. Chief Engineer Lewis and Secretary Norman, Secretary Loveless, Deputy Secretary Hughes, and of course, Assistant Director Unruh for giving us the update from the state agencies. Next up, we have a presentation on the Student Poster Awards. Part of the Governor's Conference involves a poster contest, and we will hear from Susan Metzger about the outcome of this contest. Susan is Associate Director with the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment and the Kansas Water Resources Institute. So I believe Susan has prepared a video for us, and let's take a look now.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Metzger, and I serve as the Associate Director for the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment, or KCARE, at Kansas State University. And it's my pleasure to share with you the Student Poster Awards for this year's Governor's Water Conference. First, I'd like to thank the poster judging team. These individuals came together to review nearly 30 submissions of both graduate and undergraduate posters. Debbie Baker, Liz Smith, Gaisheng Liu, John Renke, Ken Cope, Lizzie Hickman, Melissa Harvey, and Ted Harris. Thank you for contributing hours of your time and making the difficult decision to select this year's winners. If we were together in person, you'd have the opportunity to tour a room full of posters and visit with the students that contributed them. You still have the opportunity to view these posters virtually. So I encourage you to visit the Water Office website and click on each of these posters and view them in PDF format. With each poster, you'll also have the opportunity to hear in the words of the students that contributed them through a video presentation. Next, we'll announce the award winners in both the graduate and undergraduate categories. On behalf of Take Care, we're able to provide a financial award to each of the students winning both the runner-up and the top poster in the categories of graduate and undergraduate, beginning with the undergraduate student poster award winners. And the runner-up receiving $125 is Rebecca Kessler from the University of Kansas and her poster, Optimal Drinking Water Depths. Congratulations, Rebecca. And the top undergraduate poster receiving $250 is Hannah West from the University of Kansas and her poster, Microbes on the Margins, Fungi and Bacteria on the Edges of Kansas Rivers. Congratulations, Hannah. Moving on to the graduate student poster award winners, and the runner-up in this category, also receiving $125, is Alex Martin from the University of Kansas and his poster, Internal Phosphorus Loading in Marion Reservoir, Kansas, a sediment core incubation study. And the top graduate poster award receiving $250 goes to Amareza Zaranash from the University of Kansas and his poster, High Frequency Sensing of Specific Conductance to Understand Solute Transport Mechanisms During Storm Events in Johnson County, Kansas. Congratulations, Amareza. Congratulations and thank you to all of the students who contributed posters as part of this year's Governor's Water Conference. Again, I encourage you to go to the Water Office website and visit each of these posters virtually and see the video contributions from the students. Congratulations especially goes out to our 4 award winners in the graduate and undergraduate categories. This concludes this year's poster presentation for the Governor's Water Conference. I look forward to seeing you in person next year.
Well, thank you very much to Susan Metzger and to K-Care for the poster contest. It is too bad that we can't see those in person, but I encourage you to do as Susan said and take a look at those online. They represent a lot of hard work and a lot of good work. So we're going to take a little break. Before we go on break, I'm going to explain what's going to happen after break. This is a new feature to our online conference. It is a virtual social. We'll all break and plan to return at 4:45 for the social time. There will be breakout social rooms with an agency representative on each topic should you have specific questions in that regard. However, we hope you use the social as an opportunity to meet new faces, catch up with familiar faces, and simply have good conversations as you would be doing if we were in person. Please plan to mix and reshuffle a little after 5 o'clock. We will have allowed the social time to run until 5:30. We'll also have some door prizes and announcements through the social time. We'll make announcements at the top of your screen and in the chat box as those occur. The breakout social rooms, there will be 4 of them, one on groundwater, water quality, or groundwater, water quantity, surface water, water quality, wildlife in and out of the water, and young professionals. And before we go for our break, I'll just mention a little bit about day 2, which happens tomorrow morning. Day 2 starts at 7:45 a.m., bright and early. Have your coffee. We will have instructions because tomorrow will be a number of breakout sessions. So we'd like to make sure everybody understands how to pop in and out of the ones that they want to attend. So those instructions will start at 7:45 a.m. The presentations themselves will begin at 8. And PDH credits, some people have asked about those. They will be available and information on that will be shared tomorrow. So while we are on break, enjoy the winners of the photo contest with the Governor's Conference. We also have a photography contest, so you will get to see some winning entries during our break time. So enjoy your break and please come back and enjoy some social time at 4:45. Thank you.